An elegant woman stepped onto a first-class flight, her composed demeanor hinting at decades of hard-earned wisdom and quiet accomplishment. But a single moment, a spilled glass of wine, was about to unravel a chain of events that would transform lives. What began as a simple accident quickly became a powerful lesson, not only for the flight attendant, but for everyone fortunate enough to hear this remarkable story. What happens when prejudice collides with resilience at 35,000 feet? This is a story of forgiveness, change, and the extraordinary legacy of one woman whose life continues to inspire generations. Before we delve into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy tales of hope, courage, and transformation, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of perseverance and empowerment to light. Some marks never fade, much like the memory of standing with a great leader in Montrose, Georgia. The gentle hum of the airplane filled the cabin as Amara Lewis adjusted her seatbelt, her gaze fixed on the small screen in front of her. A somber news anchor's voice carried through her earbuds, recounting another tragic headline, another life lost to injustice. Amara instinctively reached for her handbag, her fingers brushing against the edges of a worn photograph tucked carefully inside. She had carried it for 60 years, a relic of a day that changed everything. Across the aisle, her husband, Daniel Lewis, folded his newspaper with the precision of a man shaped by years in uniform. The headline on the front page read, "March for Equality 60 Years Later." He caught Amara's eye and gave her a knowing nod. "They're hosting a big event at the Freedom Square Memorial," he said softly. Amara allowed herself a faint smile. "I'm not sure I have the strength for another speech," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Daniel, who had witnessed her countless speeches inspire generations, saw through her hesitation. As Amara settled into her thoughts, a young flight attendant approached. Leah, in her early 30s, carried a tray of wine glasses with an air of polished efficiency. Seated next to Amara, a woman in a chic blazer reached for a glass of 1982 Cabernet Sauvignon. As she leaned back to sip, a sudden jolt of turbulence sent the deep red liquid cascading onto Amara's crisp white blouse. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Leah exclaimed, fumbling with napkins as her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Amara waved off the apology with her characteristic grace. "It's just a shirt, dear," she said gently, though her thoughts drifted elsewhere. The stain reminded her of another time, of another mark that couldn't be so easily washed away. The summer air hung heavy with heat and tension. 7-year-old Amara clung tightly to her mother's hand as they walked toward the imposing home where her mother worked as a housekeeper. The scratchy hum of a radio carried the voice of a folk singer lamenting, "How many roads must a man walk down before they call him a man?" Inside the sprawling house, Judge Wallace's daughter, Lucy, sat on the floor surrounded by books. Her blonde curls bounced as she looked up and smiled brightly. "Amara, come read with me," Lucy called, holding up a picture book. Amara's mother hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Just for a little while," she said quietly. Amara wasn't allowed to touch the books, but Lucy didn't care. Together, they traced letters with their fingers, giggling at the colorful illustrations. In those stolen moments, Amara discovered a world far beyond the segregated streets of Montrose. That evening, the church was packed with families singing hymns of hope and defiance. Amara's mother whispered, "Dr. Evans is here tonight. Stay close to me." Amara's eyes widened as she caught sight of him, a towering figure of calm determination. When he spoke, his words resonated like thunder. "We will not be satisfied until justice flows like a mighty river and righteousness like a never-ending stream," Dr. Evans declared, his voice ringing through the room. But outside, the city was far less kind. The children's crusade had drawn national attention, but it also unleashed a wave of cruelty. One fateful day, Amara found herself caught in the chaos. Hundreds of children gathered in the streets, their chants filling the air with determination. The fire hoses came first, sending torrents of water that knocked children off their feet. Then came the snarling dogs, lunging and snapping at the crowd. Terrified, Amara stood frozen, her small frame trembling amidst the chaos. Suddenly, she felt a steady hand on her shoulder. Turning, she saw Dr. Evans shielding her from the chaos. A flash from a camera captured the moment, A frightened girl standing beside a man who refused to back down. Back in the present, Amara's eyes clouded as she recalled the memory. The photograph in her handbag bore the weight of that day, now faded but never forgotten. Leah, the flight attendant, glanced at the image with growing curiosity. "Is that Dr. Evans?" she asked hesitantly. Amara nodded. "Yes, it was a long time ago." Leah studied the picture, recognition dawning. "I've seen this before. It was in a documentary, wasn't it? That little girl was you." Amara's bittersweet smile deepened. "That day I learned a lesson I've carried with me ever since. Some stains never fade, but they don't have to define us." As the turbulence eased and the cabin settled, Daniel reached across the aisle, placing his hand gently over hers. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said softly. Amara gazed out of the window, the clouds parting to reveal the skyline of New York City below. "Yes," she replied, "but the journey isn't over." Leah's gaze lingered on Amara, the seeds of self-reflection planted deep in her mind. And so at 35,000 feet, a spilled glass of wine set into motion a story of resilience, legacy, and the power of one woman to inspire a world still learning to change. The photographer's flash froze a moment in time. A young girl, wide-eyed and trembling, standing beside a towering figure of defiance. Back in the present, Amara Lewis sat quietly in her seat, her fingers brushing over the worn edges of the photograph she had carried for decades. Her seatmate, Leah, leaned slightly closer, unable to hide her curiosity. "Is that Dr. Evans?" she asked hesitantly, her eyes darting between the photograph and Amara's face. Amara nodded softly. "Yes, it was a long time ago," she replied, but Leah wasn't finished. Her gaze lingered on the photograph as recognition dawned. "Wait, I've seen this before," she said, her voice growing excited. "Wasn't this in a documentary on PBS? You're the little girl in the picture." Amara's smile held a bittersweet edge. "That day in Montrose, I learned something that stayed with me. Some stains never fade, but they don't have to define you." As the turbulence eased and the plane steadied, Amara turned toward the window, gazing out as the Manhattan skyline began to emerge through the clouds. Across the aisle, her husband Daniel reached for her hand, his warm grip grounding her. "We've come a long way," Daniel said quietly, his voice filled with both pride and sorrow. "Yes," Amara agreed, "but the journey isn't over." Leah, still seated beside her, stared at the photograph as thoughts swirled in her mind. Something about Amara, her poise, her history, planted a seed of curiosity and self-reflection that Leah couldn't yet articulate. The sweltering summer heat weighed down on the small town of Montrose, its heavy air thick with tension. At just 7 years old, Amara was small for her age, but her wide eyes were filled with curiosity as she clung tightly to her mother's hand. They walked toward the imposing home of Judge Carter, a sprawling white-columned estate nestled amidst vibrant greenery. Amara's mother, Lena, worked tirelessly as a housekeeper for the Carters, navigating a world of rigid rules and unspoken hierarchies. "Stay close to me," Lena whispered as they entered through the back door, her voice a blend of caution and quiet determination. Inside, the air was cooler, but no less stifling. Judge Carter was a formidable figure in Montrose, a man whose unyielding belief in segregation shaped the town's very fabric. His wife managed the household with an iron grip, but their daughter Lucy seemed untouched by her parents' prejudices. "Amara," Lucy called cheerfully, her blonde curls bouncing as she waved a brightly illustrated book in the air. "Come read with me." Lena hesitated, glancing at the stern housekeeper nearby, but Lucy's insistence left little room for protest. "Just for a little while," Lena said, her tone a mix of resignation and quiet resistance. Lucy led Amara to a cozy corner piled high with colorful books. Amara's eyes widened at the sight. She wasn't allowed to touch them, but Lucy didn't care. Together, they traced letters with their fingers, giggling over the stories hidden within the pages. In those stolen moments, Amara discovered a world far beyond Montrose's segregated streets. The next evening, the small church in town buzzed with energy. Families filled every pew, their voices rising in hymns of hope and defiance. "Dr. Evans is here tonight," Lena whispered to Amara. "Stay quiet and listen." Amara's legs dangled from the wooden bench as she craned her neck to see the man everyone was whispering about. When Dr. Evans took the pulpit, his presence seemed to fill the room. "We will not rest," he proclaimed, his deep voice resonating through the sanctuary, until justice flows like a mighty river and righteousness like an endless stream. The congregation erupted in applause, their voices blending into a powerful song of unity. Amara didn't fully understand the weight of his words, but she felt their power. A flicker of possibility stirred within her young heart. By spring, Montrose was a town under siege. The Children's March, led by Dr. Evans and local activists, brought hundreds of children into the streets to demand change. Amara begged her mother to let her join. "No," Lena said firmly, "it's too dangerous." But Amara's persistence eventually wore her down, and Lena reluctantly allowed her daughter to join the older children from their church. On the day of the march, Amara stood among a sea of determined young faces. The air buzzed with a mix of hope and tension as their voices rose in song. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Police Chief Morgan's orders came swiftly. Fire hoses roared to life, their torrents of water sweeping children off their feet. Dogs barked ferociously, lunging at the terrified crowd. Amara froze, her small frame trembling amidst the chaos. A police officer shouted, and the world seemed to close in around her. Then she felt it, a steady hand on her shoulder. Turning, she saw Dr. Evans kneeling beside her, his calm presence a beacon of strength in the storm. "Stay strong, little one," he said gently, shielding her from the chaos. A camera's flash illuminated the scene, capturing the stark contrast of fear and resolve. A frightened girl beside a man who refused to yield. Back on the plane, Amara's hand tightened around the faded photograph. Her mind drifted to that day in Montrose, a memory etched deeply into her soul. The wine stain on her blouse had drawn her back to a time when the world felt impossibly divided, yet filled with people daring to dream of something better. Amara's small frame trembled as the chaos closed in around her. A police officer shouted orders, but her legs refused to move. Panic gripped her. Then, out of nowhere, she felt a steady hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Dr. Evans, his calm presence a lifeline amidst the storm. "Stay strong, little one," he said gently, positioning himself to shield her. At that moment, a camera flash lit up the scene, capturing it forever, a frightened girl standing beside a man of unwavering resolve. Back in the present, Amara's eyes glistened as she recounted the memory to Leah. The younger woman, now completely absorbed, listened intently. The earlier awkwardness over the wine spill had melted away, replaced by admiration. "I've seen that photograph," Leah said, her voice tinged with awe. "It's in history books. That was you." Amara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That day taught me something I've carried with me ever since," she said. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing firm despite it." Leah looked at Amara, her face a mixture of respect and introspection. She glanced at the wine stain on Amara's blouse, then at the worn photograph in her hand. The connection between past and present felt almost tangible. The sweltering humidity clung to Daniel Lewis like a second skin. Crouched low in the dense underbrush, his M16 rifle gripped tightly, his heart thundered in his chest. The jungle around him seemed alive with unseen threats. The rustle of leaves, the hum of insects, and the ever-present smell of damp earth and fear. "Stay close, Lewis," a voice hissed behind him. It was Tommy Carter, Daniel's commanding officer and the son of a powerful judge back in Georgia. The two men had grown up in completely different worlds. In Montrose, their paths wouldn't have crossed. But here, in the chaos of war, none of that mattered. Their patrol had gone horribly wrong. An ambush had left half their unit dead or wounded, and now Daniel was leading the survivors to an extraction point. Just a year earlier, Daniel had graduated from Morgan State University, driven by a belief that enlisting would allow him to serve his country and earn the respect so often denied to men like him. Instead, he found himself fighting not just the Viet Cong, but also the racism embedded in the very institution he had vowed to serve. "Lewis, over here," Tommy called, waving him toward a makeshift cover. The two men crouched low as gunfire erupted nearby. Tommy's face was pale, his hands trembling as he clutched his weapon. "They're everywhere," he muttered, panic lacing his voice. "We'll get out of this," Daniel said firmly. His voice was steady, even though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. In moments like these, conviction mattered as much as strategy. Back home, the world was unraveling. News of the civil rights movement filtered through the jungle, pulling Daniel's thoughts back to Montrose, to the marches and protests reshaping America even as the war consumed his every waking moment. In April 1968, the devastating news reached the jungle through the crackling static of a radio. Dr. Evans is dead. Daniel had been sitting in a makeshift camp, eating his rations, when the announcement came. The flat, emotionless tone of the broadcast hit him like a physical blow. He stared at the radio, the words reverberating in his chest. For a moment, even the distant gunfire seemed to pause under the weight of loss. Months later, in the Mekong Delta, Daniel faced his defining moment. The unit had been ambushed again, and Tommy was gravely injured, a jagged piece of shrapnel lodged deep in his leg. "Leave me," Tommy gasped, blood seeping through his uniform. "You have to go." "Not without you," Daniel replied, determination hardening his voice. Ignoring the danger, he hoisted Tommy's arm over his shoulder, beginning an arduous trek through hostile territory. Every step was a gamble, each breath a victory. The weight of Tommy's body strained Daniel's muscles, but his resolve was unyielding. Hours later, they reached the extraction point. Helicopter blades whipped the humid air as medics rushed to assist Tommy. Daniel collapsed onto the ground, his vision blurring. He had done it. He had saved a man who, not long ago, had embodied the very prejudice Daniel had spent his life fighting. For his actions, Daniel was awarded both the Purple Heart and the Silver Star. The medals were tangible proof of his bravery, but they couldn't erase the scars, physical or emotional. Weeks later, Tommy, now recovering in a military hospital, requested to see Daniel. "I owe you my life," Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you. About so much." Daniel nodded, his face unreadable. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but he had learned from Amara that real change often began with the smallest of steps. Daniel's journey didn't end in Vietnam. The GI Bill and his unyielding determination led him to Harvard Law School. There, he faced new battles: skepticism, condescension, and the weight of expectations. But Daniel was no stranger to fighting uphill battles. His experiences, both in Montrose and the jungles of Vietnam, shaped him into a man who didn't just survive adversity, he transformed it into purpose. As Amara's plane descended into New York, her thoughts shifted to Daniel's story, a chapter in their family's legacy that echoed her own journey. She glanced at Leah, who was still deep in thought, the photograph now resting between them. "Sometimes, courage is just taking the next step," Amara murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Daniel's journey didn't end in the Mekong Delta. Returning home, he channeled his discipline and determination into a new battle, earning a law degree at Harvard. Supported by the GI Bill, he secured a place at the prestigious institution, but the transition was anything but seamless. To many of his peers, Daniel was just that war hero from the South. They underestimated him, reducing him to a stereotype. But Daniel refused to let their narrow perceptions define him. He had already survived battles far more harrowing and was determined to prove he was more than their labels. At Harvard, Daniel reconnected with Tommy Carter, now also a student. Their unlikely friendship grew out of the crucible of shared experience in Vietnam. Together, they worked on cases that championed civil rights, blending Daniel's lived experience of injustice with Tommy's evolving worldview. Back on the plane, Amara's voice interrupted Leah's thoughts. Daniel's time in Vietnam taught him that courage isn't about glory. It's about sacrifice and standing up for what's right, even when the odds are against you. Leah nodded, her gaze lingering on the photograph in Amara's hand. The wine stain on Amara's blouse, the faded photograph, and the stories she had just heard all began to fit together. But the picture they painted was far more complex than Leah could have imagined. The Harvard campus buzzed with life as students hurried between classes, their arms full of books filled with theories and possibilities. Among them was Amara Lewis, tall and poised, with sharp eyes that reflected both resilience and an unshakable determination. Amara had earned her place at Harvard through a scholarship, a victory born from the sacrifices of the civil rights movement. Yet every step she took on campus felt like an uphill climb. "Isn't that the housekeeper's daughter?" a voice whispered as she passed by. Amara didn't flinch. She had heard it before. The whispers, side glances, and sneers had become as routine as her morning lectures. But instead of shrinking under the weight of their judgment, she carried it with quiet resolve. To them, she was an outsider. To herself, she was a force for change. Her first weeks at Harvard were a trial by fire. Professors questioned her capabilities, their skepticism thinly veiled. In her contracts law class, Professor Whitaker once dismissed her argument with a curt remark. Interesting, but not entirely thought through. The comment stung, but Amara turned it into fuel. She poured herself into her studies, her dorm room often illuminated late into the night by the soft glow of her desk lamp. As the women's liberation movement gained momentum, Amara found herself navigating a unique intersection of struggles. As a Black woman, she faced dual layers of prejudice. During one campus rally, advocating for gender equality, she grew frustrated by the movement's narrow focus on white women's issues. "It's not just about breaking the glass ceiling," Amara said during one meeting. "For some of us, it's about being allowed into the building at all." Her words silenced the room, planting seeds of reflection in some and discomfort in others. One afternoon, as Amara entered the law library, she froze. Sitting at one of the tables was Tommy Carter, the man whose life Daniel had saved in Vietnam. Tommy looked up, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Amara?" he said. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but guarded. "I'm a teaching assistant here now," Tommy explained, standing to greet her. "Daniel mentioned you once. He said you were unstoppable." Amara softened slightly. Daniel's friendship with Tommy had always intrigued her, and now she had the chance to see for herself how much the man had changed. Over the next few months, Tommy became an unexpected ally. He offered advice, helped her navigate Harvard's complexities, and even deflected some of the sharper edges of academic prejudice. Their collaboration wasn't immediate, but it grew from mutual respect and Daniel's influence. As the nation reeled from the revelations of Watergate, Amara found herself deeply immersed in case studies dissecting the scandal. The corruption and misuse of power disgusted her, but it also steeled her resolve. She began envisioning a future where the law could serve as a tool for equity rather than oppression. Her studies became a weapon, and by her final year, she had transformed skepticism into admiration. Amara's name became synonymous with excellence. Professors who had once doubted her now sought her input, and her classmates, who had once whispered behind her back, recognized her as a leader. She carried their shifting perceptions with the same quiet grace that had always defined her. She wasn't there to prove them wrong. She was there to prove herself right. By the time graduation approached in 1975, Amara Lewis had become a leading figure among her peers. Her name was synonymous with excellence. When it came time to select the class valedictorian, the choice was unanimous. On a bright spring day, the air buzzed with excitement as families gathered beneath the sprawling oak trees of Harvard's campus. Amara stood at the podium, her cap and gown pristine, her heart pounding. She scanned the crowd until her eyes found her mother, Lena, whose face was filled with pride, her hands clutching a tissue. Amara began her speech with a steady voice, but the weight of her journey gave her words power. "I came here as the housekeeper's daughter," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "And today, I stand before you as valedictorian because my mother taught me the value of resilience and the power of education. For too long, doors have been closed to people like us, but I am here to tell you that every closed door is an invitation to build a new one." The crowd erupted into applause, but Amara's gaze remained fixed on Lena, who stood with tears streaming down her face. In that moment, the years of whispers, doubt, and struggle seemed distant, overshadowed by the brilliance of her achievement. Back on the plane, Amara folded her hands in her lap and turned to Leah. "Education isn't just about knowledge," she said quietly. "It's about power. The power to change your circumstances, your community, and the world." Leah nodded slowly, the pieces of Amara's story fitting together like a mosaic. She glanced at her tablet, where she had been scrolling through articles about civil rights leaders. "You've changed so much, haven't you?" Leah murmured. "No," Amara replied with a soft smile. "I've just made sure the world finally sees who I've always been." Amara glanced out the airplane window, the soft clouds below contrasting with the turbulence in her memories. Her thoughts drifted to Daniel, his steady smile, and the battles they had fought together. Not on battlefields, but within the walls of society. Her mind wandered back to the early days of their love story. The women's rights seminar was held in a modest conference room at the university. Fresh from her valedictorian speech at Harvard, Amara sat in the audience, listening to spirited discussions about gender equality in the workplace. The room buzzed with energy, but her attention was drawn to the man standing at the back. His presence was both commanding and calming. Daniel Lewis, a decorated Vietnam veteran, was there as a guest speaker. He advocated for better support systems for returning soldiers and spoke with a voice rich in conviction. True equality, Daniel said, isn't about winning battles alone, it's about ensuring no one fights them without support. After the seminar, Daniel approached Amara. Valedictorian, huh? He said with a warm smile. Your reputation precedes you. And you must be the soldier my brother can't stop talking about, she replied, extending her hand. Their handshake lingered, an unspoken connection forming in that moment. Their first date was anything but conventional. Daniel invited Amara to a hidden jazz club in a quiet corner of Boston. The dim lighting, soulful saxophone, and hum of conversation created an intimate atmosphere. Over glasses of wine, they spoke about everything, their families, their dreams, and their shared frustrations, with a world that often felt stacked against them. I've spent my whole life proving people wrong, Amara confessed. But sometimes I wonder if they'll ever see me for who I am. Daniel leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. They'll see you, Amara, and when they do, they won't be able to look away. As their relationship deepened, challenges emerged from both sides. Daniel's family, still wrestling with old prejudices, questioned his choice to be with a woman so fiercely independent. Meanwhile, Lena worried that Daniel's visible and invisible scars from the war might weigh too heavily on her daughter. But Amara and Daniel discovered that love wasn't about erasing boundaries. It was about crossing them together. Their shared resilience became the foundation of their bond, and their love only grew stronger. Daniel proposed during a quiet moment in a park. They sat beneath a blooming cherry tree, its pink petals drifting down like whispers of hope. I don't have a fancy ring or a grand speech, Daniel said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. What I do have is a promise, to stand beside you, to fight for you, and to love you for all the days of my life. Amara Lewis, will you marry me? Amara's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. Yes, Daniel. 1,000 times yes. Their wedding was held in a small church in Montrose, a place steeped in both history and hope. It was a modest affair, attended by family, friends, and members of the community who had watched them grow. But their union wasn't without obstacles. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, anonymous letters threatened to disrupt the event, hateful words scrawled on paper reminding them that the fight for equality was far from over. On the day of their wedding, however, the community rallied around them, forming a protective circle of love and support. Amara walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, Lena by her side. Daniel waited at the altar, his eyes filled with emotion. When they exchanged vows, their words resonated with everyone present, a testament to their journey and their unyielding belief in a future built on love and unity. Back on the plane, Amara smiled at the memory of that day. She turned to Leah, who was still lost in thought. Love isn't about perfection, Amara said softly. It's about persistence, choosing each other every single day. Leah looked up, her expression thoughtful. And you and Daniel, you've been choosing each other ever since? Amara nodded. Every day, especially when it's hard. The wedding was a modest yet deeply meaningful affair, attended by family, friends, and community members who had watched Amara Lewis and Daniel Lewis grow together. Yet their union wasn't without challenges. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, anonymous letters filled with hateful words threatened to disrupt the event. Each scrawled line was a stark reminder that the fight for equality was far from over. But on the day of their wedding, the community rallied around them. Friends and neighbors formed a protective circle of love and support, ensuring the day was about unity rather than division. Amara walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, her mother Lena by her side. At the altar, Daniel waited, his eyes filled with emotion. When they exchanged vows, their words resonated deeply with everyone present, a testament to their journey and their unyielding belief in a future built on love and unity. Back on the plane, Amara smiled at the memory of that day. She turned to Leah, who had been absent-mindedly scrolling through articles on her tablet. "Love isn't about perfection," Amara said softly. "It's about persistence, about choosing each other every single day." Leah looked up, her expression thoughtful. "And you and Daniel, you've been choosing each other ever since?" Amara nodded. "Every day, especially when it's hard." The plane hummed steadily as Amara adjusted her seatbelt. The sprawling skyline of New York City came into view, a labyrinth of opportunity and challenge. She glanced at Leah, whose tablet now lay idle as she stared into the distance. Amara's lips curled into a faint smile. She recognized that look. It was the same one she'd worn years ago, when she first stepped into the world of Wall Street, brimming with hope and determination. Her thoughts drifted back to those early days, filled with promise and struggle. Amara's first day at a prestigious investment firm was a rude awakening. The energy inside the glass-paneled skyscraper buzzed, but her presence seemed to disrupt the rhythm. Men in sharp suits barely acknowledged her, and the women she saw were relegated to administrative tasks, typing, shuffling papers, or fetching coffee. The weight of expectations pressed down on her, heavier than the portfolio she carried. Her Harvard degree had earned her a junior analyst position, but it quickly became clear that titles meant little in this world. Her tasks were menial, compiling reports, running errands, preparing analyses, only to have her ideas dismissed or outright stolen. One incident stood out sharply. A manager glanced at her carefully crafted stock analysis, dismissed her insights in a meeting, and then presented her exact strategy as his own a week later. The applause he received stung more than the condescension that preceded it. Amara learned to channel her frustration into long, solitary nights at the office. By day, she endured the subtle slights and outright dismissals. By night, she pored over financial data, searching for patterns others had overlooked. Her quiet determination became her armor, shielding her against the constant underestimation. At home, Daniel became her anchor. Their evenings, spent surrounded by takeout containers and scattered financial journals, were a refuge from the relentless grind. It was during one of these evenings, as Amara vented about yet another stolen idea, that Daniel leaned forward. "Start your own firm," he said simply. Amara blinked at him. "Daniel, we'd have to sell the house. We'd have nothing." He took her hand, his gaze steady. "You've never let fear stop you before. Why start now?" The decision was made. They sold their home, emptied their savings, and launched Lewis Capital. It began in a tiny, unremarkable office with just Amara, Daniel, and a mountain of ambition. The early days were grueling. Clients were scarce, and many openly doubted Amara's ability to compete in such a ruthless field. But she was relentless. She spent every waking hour studying market trends and crafting strategies that would soon set her apart. Her breakthrough came during the infamous stock market crash of 1987, known as Black Monday. While panic gripped Wall Street, Amara stayed calm. She had anticipated the downturn weeks earlier and advised her clients to diversify their portfolios. When the dust settled, Lewis Capital had not only survived but thrived. Word spread of Amara's foresight and the firm's stability, bringing in new clients who trusted her expertise. As the firm grew, Amara set her sights on a symbolic victory. One of the corporations that had once rejected her for an entry-level position became her target. The company was a bastion of Wall Street elitism, and its acquisition became a personal mission. The negotiations were grueling. Board members questioned her ability to manage an organization of such scale, doubting her resolve at every turn. But Amara countered each challenge with a meticulous strategy, backed by data and an unshakable determination. Months later, the deal was sealed. Standing in the lobby of the building she now owned, Amara allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. Daniel, standing beside her, said with admiration, "You've come a long way." She turned to him, her eyes steady, "And we're just getting started." Months after the deal closed, Amara Lewis stood in the lobby of the building she now owned. The polished floors and towering glass walls seemed to reflect her journey, a testament to persistence and vision. "You've come a long way," Daniel said, his voice filled with admiration. Amara turned to him, her gaze steady. "And we're just getting started." Back on the plane, Amara's voice drew Leah back to the present. "They didn't make it easy for me," Amara said softly, "but I didn't expect them to. Change never comes easy." Leah tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. How did you keep going when it felt like everyone was against you? Amara's smile deepened. It wasn't just about me. It was about proving that the doors they closed on people like me could be broken open and left open for others. Leah's eyes flicked to her tablet, its screen casting a soft glow on her face. Amara watched, recognizing the spark of ambition igniting in her younger companion. The plane touched down, its wheels skimming the runway before settling into a steady roll. Amara gathered her belongings, her mind already focused on the next chapter of her journey. Change had never come easily, but it had always been worth the fight. Amara adjusted the microphone as she stood on the grand stage, the applause of the audience echoing through the hall. She wore a pristine white Chanel suit, a deliberate choice. It was a tribute to her past, to the little girl from Montrose, Georgia, who had once worn a coffee-stained dress to a church service because her mother couldn't afford a replacement. When I was 7 years old, she began, her voice steady and warm. I spilled coffee on my dress before attending a service where Dr. Evans spoke. My mother didn't have the means to replace it, so I wore that stained dress proudly. That day, I learned that dignity isn't about perfection, it's about purpose. Her words resonated deeply, and the room rose in a standing ovation. As Amara held the medal in her hands, she felt the weight of her journey. A journey that began in humility and carried her to a place of profound influence. By the early 1990s, Amara's reputation on Wall Street was firmly established, but her ambitions extended far beyond the financial sector. The disparities she had witnessed throughout her career fueled a deeper purpose. I don't just want to create wealth, she said during a private fundraiser. I want to create opportunities. Talent doesn't discriminate, but access does. Her words became the foundation of the Lewis Foundation, established to empower marginalized communities through education and entrepreneurship. Amara believed in teaching people to build their own futures, and her programs quickly became a beacon of hope for thousands. On a clear September morning, the world shifted. Amara was in New York when the towers fell, and the shockwaves of 9/11 reverberated through every corner of the city. Like so many others, she felt an urgent call to action. She redirected significant resources from her foundation toward rebuilding efforts, focusing on supporting small businesses devastated by the tragedy. Her leadership during this time earned her national recognition, but she brushed off the accolades. "This isn't about me," she said in a television interview. "It's about resilience. It's about standing together when everything around us falls apart." The financial crisis tested Amara's principles like never before. As markets crumbled, so did the trust of millions in the systems that had promised stability. Under Amara's guidance, Lewis Capital remained a rare beacon of ethical practices. She refused to invest in the predatory schemes that had led to the collapse, and her firm weathered the storm. But Amara wasn't content to simply survive. She took a bold stance, advocating for regulatory reforms and greater transparency in financial institutions. In her testimony before Congress, she declared, "We cannot rebuild trust without integrity, and we cannot achieve stability without fairness." Her commitment to these principles solidified her legacy, not just as a trailblazer in finance, but as a moral compass in an industry often devoid of one. When the Nobel Committee announced that Amara Lewis would receive the prize in economics for her contributions to financial equity, the news reverberated across the globe. The award was more than just recognition of her work. It was validation of her belief that finance could be a force for good. The ceremony in Stockholm was a moment Amara had never imagined as a child. As she stood on the stage, the weight of her journey came rushing back. Her speech began with a smile and a story. "That coffee-stained dress I wore when I was 7 years old taught me a lesson that has stayed with me. Even when the world sees your imperfections, you can choose to carry yourself with dignity." Her words drew another standing ovation. As Amara stepped away from the podium, she thought of her mother, of Daniel, and of the countless others who had walked beside her. The moment was hers, but the victory was shared. As Amara Lewis held the medal, her thoughts turned to her mother, to Daniel, and to the countless others who had walked beside her or cleared a path before her. The moment was hers, but the victory was shared. On the plane, Amara's voice was soft as she recounted the story to Leah. This white suit wasn't just a fashion choice, Amara explained. It was a reminder to me and to everyone watching that the stains of our past don't define us. They shape us, yes, but they also propel us forward. Leah looked at Amara with newfound admiration. You took every challenge and turned it into something beautiful. That's extraordinary. Amara smiled gently. It's not extraordinary, Leah. It's necessary, and one day you'll do the same. The plane began its descent, the city below shimmering with possibilities. Amara adjusted her scarf, her mind already turning to the next chapter of her journey. The fight for justice and equality was far from over, but she welcomed it. After all, change wasn't a destination, it was a way of life. When Leah first spilled wine on Amara's blouse, she hadn't expected anything more than an awkward apology. Yet by the end of the flight, the encounter had transformed her perspective. The plane's wheels touched down with a soft thud. Leah's heart pounded, the weight of the past few hours settling in. She had boarded the flight expecting a routine trip, but Amara Lewis had turned it into a mirror, forcing Leah to confront truths she had long avoided. The stain on Amara's pristine blouse, once a source of embarrassment, now felt symbolic, a mark of Leah's own imperfections and prejudices. In the 1990s, Leah Thompson was born into privilege, raised on a sprawling southern estate where tradition reigned supreme. Her father, a staunch conservative, often spoke in absolutes. People should stay where they belong, he would say, sipping bourbon on the veranda. Leah absorbed these beliefs without question. Her world was neatly divided into us and them. Her mother, though gentler in tone, reinforced the same ideals through silence. It's just the way things are, her mother would murmur whenever Leah asked why their black housekeeper ate in the kitchen instead of at the dining table. In college, Leah's perspective began to shift. She encountered classmates who challenged her worldview and professors who exposed her to the complexities of history. But the roots of her upbringing ran deep, and her transformation was slow and incomplete. She graduated with a business degree, stepped into a corporate career, and embraced the comfort of the status quo. Leah's encounter with Amara began as an accident. The turbulence, the spilled wine, the hastily muttered apology. It could have ended there. But as Leah sat beside Amara, listening to her stories of resilience and triumph, an unease began to grow. Amara's calm dignity contrasted starkly with Leah's own restlessness. You've accomplished so much, Leah said at one point, unable to mask her awe. Amara's response was measured. The accomplishments are just milestones. What matters is the legacy we leave behind. Those words echoed in Leah's mind, forcing her to replay her own choices. She had climbed the corporate ladder with efficiency, but her life felt hollow. What had she contributed? Who had she helped? The answers left her deeply uncomfortable. That night, in her hotel room, Leah stood before the bathroom mirror. Her reflection stared back, tired and unguarded. The wine spill, once a source of irritation, now felt like a metaphor. Amara had carried her stains with pride, using them as markers of growth. Leah had spent her life avoiding hers, masking her insecurities with privilege and indifference. She opened her laptop and searched for Amara's name. Articles, interviews, and documentaries filled the screen. Leah watched clips of Amara's congressional testimony, her Nobel acceptance speech, and the groundbreaking initiatives of the Lewis Foundation. Each story chipped away at Leah's defenses, leaving her exposed. The next morning, Leah woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She drafted an email to her company's leadership, proposing a bold diversity initiative inspired by Amara's work. The proposal included scholarships, mentorship programs, and community outreach projects. Leah hesitated before hitting send. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, warning her against rocking the boat. Then she thought of Amara, of the wine stain, and pressed the button. Later that week, Leah attended a local seminar on racial equity in the workplace. She introduced herself to the panelists, admitting her past ignorance and expressing a genuine desire to learn. The response was mixed. Some welcomed her honesty, while others remained skeptical. Leah understood their hesitation. Change, she knew, would require more than words. Back on the plane as the city came into view, Leah glanced at Amara one last time. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with sincerity. "For everything." Amara nodded. It's not about thanking me, Leah. It's about what you do next. As Leah stepped off the plane, she felt like she was finally moving forward, not just through an airport, but through her own life. Weeks after their flight, Amara Lewis sent an unexpected email to Leah Thompson. Amara had remembered their conversation and wanted to reconnect. They met for coffee in a quiet corner of Manhattan, where Leah shared the steps she had taken since their flight. She spoke about her growing awareness, the diversity initiative she had proposed at work, and the personal changes she was striving to make. Amara listened intently, her gaze steady. "Change isn't linear," she said. "It's messy and uncomfortable, but it's necessary. The important thing is that you've started." Leah felt a weight lift. "I still have so much to learn," she admitted. Amara smiled gently. "We all do." As the plane taxied to the gate, Leah glanced at Amara one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "For everything." Amara nodded. "It's not about thanking me, it's about what you do next." Leah stepped off the plane, the bustling terminal around her a blur. For the first time, she felt like she was moving forward, not just through an airport, but through her own life. The grand opening of the Lewis Training Center for Social Change was more than an event. It was a testament to resilience and a symbol of hope. The sprawling campus in Harlem stood as a beacon for transformation, blending modern design with cultural heritage. Banners fluttered in the crisp morning air, each bearing the center's motto, "Learn, Change, Lead." Amara stood at the podium, her voice steady and warm as it carried across the crowd. "This center isn't about me," she began. "It's about us, about creating a space where we confront our biases, learn our history, and build a future where equity isn't just an ideal, it's a reality." The applause was thunderous, but Amara's gaze remained focused on the faces before her, educators, activists, students, and skeptics alike. After winning the Nobel Prize, Amara found herself at a crossroads. While her work in finance had brought her acclaim, she felt an urgency to address the systemic issues she had witnessed throughout her life. The training center was born out of this need, a space dedicated to dismantling prejudice through education. Leah, now a key member of the initiative, watched from the sidelines. Her journey from reluctant bystander to advocate had been transformative, and the opening marked a milestone for her as well. Over the past year, Leah had immersed herself in the center's mission. She helped develop curricula and secure partnerships with corporations and schools. The programs offered were as diverse as the people they served, including workshops on unconscious bias, courses on civil rights history, and leadership training. The center's flagship course, Bridging the Divide, combined personal storytelling with academic analysis, encouraging participants to confront their own prejudices. In one of the sunlit classrooms, a group of participants sat in a circle. Among them was Daniel Lewis, now retired but as passionate as ever. Facilitating the discussion with calm authority, he drew on his experiences in Vietnam and his years supporting Amara. "I want each of you to think about a moment when you felt misunderstood," Daniel said, his voice steady. "What did it teach you about yourself? About others?" The room fell silent as participants wrestled with the question. Slowly, stories began to emerge. A young man recounting a childhood marked by poverty, a teacher confessing her blind spots, an executive admitting to a lifetime of privilege. Across the hall, Leah led a session with corporate leaders. She used her own story as a springboard, sharing how her biases had shaped her decisions and how confronting them had changed her life. "It's not enough to say we want change," she told the room. "We have to be willing to change ourselves." The training center quickly became a hub of activity. Schools integrated its programs into their curricula, and businesses sent employees for immersive workshops. Local artists contributed murals to the campus, depicting scenes from the civil rights movement alongside messages of hope and unity. Amara often walked the grounds, speaking with participants and ensuring the center's mission remained true to its roots. But the work was not without challenges. Critics dismissed the center as idealistic or divisive, while others questioned its focus on systemic change rather than immediate results. Amara faced the critiques head-on, welcoming dialogue but standing firm in her convictions. "True change isn't quick," she said in an interview. "It's built layer by layer, through education and understanding. Change is built layer by layer, through education and understanding. Amara Lewis reflected one evening as the sun set over Harlem. She stood on the rooftop garden of the training center, gazing out at the city lights sparkling like stars below. Beside her, Daniel, her partner in life and purpose, rested his hand on the railing. "You've built something incredible here," he said, his voice tinged with pride. Amara shook her head. "We've built it. This was never a solo journey." She leaned against the railing, her gaze thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever see the kind of world Dr. Evans dreamed of." Daniel placed a comforting hand over hers. "Every step we take gets us closer, and every person who walks through these doors is another step forward." The opening day of the center concluded with a candlelight vigil. Participants, staff, and community members gathered in the courtyard, each holding a candle that flickered in the gentle evening breeze. Amara stood before the crowd, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the candles. "This light represents knowledge," she said. "And knowledge is power. Together, we can shine a light on ignorance and fear and replace it with understanding and hope." As the flames swayed in unison, Amara felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The fight was far from over, but the path forward had never been clearer. The Lincoln Memorial stood as a silent witness to history. On the steps where Dr. Evans had once declared his dream, a new generation gathered to honor the legacy of those who had come before. Amara Lewis, now in her 80s, stood at the podium. Beside her were Daniel, Leah Thompson, and dozens of others whose lives had been shaped by her journey. The crowd was diverse, young and old, from every background, all united in a shared purpose. Amara adjusted the microphone and gazed across the sea of faces. Though her voice was softened by age, it carried the same conviction it always had. 60 years ago, I stood in Montrose as a child, unsure of my place in the world," she began. "Today, I stand here knowing that place, and it is here, with all of you, building a future worthy of Dr. Evans's dream." The Lewis Training Center had grown far beyond its original campus. Satellite locations had sprung up across the country, each adapting its programs to meet the unique needs of their communities. A new wave of leaders had emerged, inspired by Amara's example and determined to carry her work forward. Leah Thompson, once a reluctant participant in Amara's story, had become one of the center's most vocal advocates. Her passion for equity in education led her to establish scholarships in Amara's name, ensuring that underprivileged students had the resources they needed to succeed. Leah spoke frequently at conferences, her journey from complicity to action serving as a powerful reminder of the potential for change. Amara's grandchildren were also among those carrying the torch. One, a young civil rights attorney, had recently argued a landmark case before the Supreme Court, citing her grandmother's teachings in her closing remarks. Another, a community organizer, worked tirelessly to address systemic issues in housing and healthcare, blending activism with practical solutions. After the event, Amara and Daniel sat beneath a quiet grove of cherry trees, the soft pink blossoms drifting in the breeze, a symbol of renewal and hope. "Did you ever think we'd come this far?" Daniel asked, his voice filled with admiration. Amara smiled. "There were days I doubted it, but even on those days, I knew the fight was worth it. And look around. It's not just us anymore, it's them, the next generation." Daniel reached for her hand. "You've done something incredible, Amara. You've built a legacy that will outlast all of us." Amara's gaze drifted toward the memorial. "We've done it," she corrected gently. "No one does this alone. And that's the point, isn't it? None of this is about one person. It's about all of us together." As the sun set over Washington, D.C., the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Amara's family and friends mingled with activists, students, and community leaders. Plans for future initiatives were already being discussed, ideas sparking like fireflies in the gathering dusk. Amara watched from a distance, her heart full. She thought of her mother, of Dr. Evans, and of the countless individuals who had shaped her journey. She thought of the coffee-stained dress, the wine spilled on her blouse, and every challenge that had marked her path. Each had been a lesson, a stepping stone toward this moment. The evening was drawing to a close when Amara Lewis stepped onto the stage one last time. The crowd quieted, anticipation hanging in the air as her voice, rich with the wisdom of decades, filled the space. "This isn't an ending," she began. "It's a beginning. Every step we take, every door we open, every mind we change, it's all part of a greater journey. Dr. Evans taught us to dream, but he also taught us to act, and it is through action that dreams become reality. Her words hung in the air, a call to arms for everyone present. As the applause swelled, Amara stepped back, her heart swelling with pride and hope. Amara Lewis passed away peacefully several years later, leaving behind a legacy that spanned continents and generations. The training centers she founded continued to thrive, her teachings woven into their very foundations. Her story became part of school curricula, her name synonymous with courage and transformative change. In quiet moments, under cherry trees or beside podiums, Amara's voice seemed to echo still. Together, we can build a world where justice and equality are not dreams, but realities. As she had stood before the crowd that evening at the Lincoln Memorial, the cheers reverberating around her, Amara knew this wasn't a farewell. It was a continuation of the journey to which she had devoted her life. Amara's story wasn't just her own. It had grown into a collective legacy, a movement built on resilience, hope, and unwavering action. Her life's work reminded everyone that justice and equality aren't destinations, but ongoing efforts shaped by the actions of those courageous enough to dream and bold enough to act. Amara Lewis' story is a powerful testament to the idea that change begins with individuals willing to confront their challenges and fight for a better future. If you were in Amara's place, what would you do to make a difference? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If this story inspired you, please like and share it to spread Amara's message of hope and equality. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more uplifting stories that inspire and empower. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.